I stared at the Instagram post for the third time that evening, my wine glass trembling in my hand. My sister Melissa looked radiant in her engagement photos, draped across her fiancé Derek's lap in front of a sunset that looked professionally color-graded. 247 likes already. I hadn't even known they were engaged. The text from Mom came an hour later, as if she'd been building up the courage. "Sweetie, we need to talk about Melissa's wedding. It's going to be a small, intimate affair. Very carefully curated guest list. You understand?" I didn't understand, I called immediately. "Mom, what do you mean I'm not invited to my own sister's wedding?" There was a long pause, the kind that's filled with carefully constructed explanations. "Honey, it's just, according to YouTube analytics, 99.6% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Melissa feels that your presence might make things awkward. You know how you can be sometimes." "How I can be?" My voice cracked. "What does that even mean?" "You know." Her voice dropped to that diplomatic whisper she used when she didn't want to say what she really meant. "You're going through a lot right now. The divorce, losing your job. Melissa doesn't want any negative energy at her wedding. She wants everything to be perfect." I felt like I'd been slapped. Negative energy? Mom, I'm her sister, her only sister. "I know, sweetheart, and she loves you. But this is her day. We have to respect her wishes. Maybe after the wedding, when things settle down, you two can reconnect. It's only fair to her." Only fair to her. The words echoed in my head long after I hung up. For 3 weeks, I cycled through every emotion imaginable. Hurt, anger, confusion, self-doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too much of a mess to be around happy people. My divorce from Tom had been ugly, and yes, I'd been laid off from my marketing position, but I was rebuilding. I was trying. The worst part was the silence from Melissa herself. No call, no text, not even a perfunctory, "Sorry, hope you understand" message. Just radio silence and an increasing stream of wedding posts that I couldn't stop myself from checking. Dress shopping, venue tours, bachelorette party photos from Napa Valley. I was invisible to her, erased. Then came the Friday afternoon that changed everything. I was cleaning out my email inbox, deleting years of accumulated junk, when I stumbled across something from 2 years ago. An email from Tom to his account, which he'd accidentally sent from my laptop when we were still together. I'd never opened it because the subject line was just "quarterly reports," and I'd assumed it was work stuff. Bored and masochistic, I clicked it open. It wasn't quarterly reports. It was a thread. A long thread between Tom and someone named D. Reynolds 88. The email address made my stomach drop even before I started reading. Derek Reynolds. Melissa's Derek. Tom. "Dude, you need to tell her. This has gone on too long." Derek. I know. But if Maya finds out, it'll destroy her. And if she tells Melissa, that's my relationship done." Tom. "She's going to find out eventually. The Riverside property isn't exactly invisible. When she sees the tax documents." Derek. "That's why we need to move faster on the transfer. Get it into the LLC before year-end. Can you talk to your guy?" Tom. "Already on it. But seriously, once this is done, we need to come clean. At least to Melissa and my lawyer. This could blow up badly." Derek. "Just a few more months. Once Melissa and I are engaged, I'll have access to her trust fund. We can pay Maya back, make it right. She'll never know the difference." I read it again, then a third time. Then I dove back through my archives, finding 6 more emails over 18 months. A paper trail of my ex-husband and my future brother-in-law systematically moving my inheritance money, the property my grandmother had left me in Riverside, into a shell LLC they'd created together, the Riverside property. I'd signed it over to Tom during our marriage because he said it would be better for tax purposes, that his name on the deed would help us get a better loan. I trusted him completely. After the divorce, when I'd asked about it, he'd told me it had been sold at a loss during the market downturn. I'd been devastated, but believed him. The divorce had been so chaotic, and I'd been so emotionally destroyed that I hadn't pushed. But it hadn't been sold. They'd hidden it. And Derek was using my sister, using her trust fund, as part of their plan to eventually pay me back, without me ever knowing I'd been robbed. I sat in my apartment as the sun set, watching the shadows lengthen across my walls, and felt something cold and crystalline form in my chest. Not just anger, something sharper, more focused. They'd stolen from me. They'd lied to me. And now they were erasing me from family events because I was inconvenient, because my presence as the divorced, struggling sister might dim the shine on Melissa's perfect day. I wasn't going to scream or confront or make a scene. I was going to do something much worse. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted, a perfect wedding day. The next morning, I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus, a former forensic accountant who'd gone into private practice after burning out at the FBI. He was thorough, discreet, and expensive. I paid his retainer with the last of my savings. I need everything, I told him. Financial records, property transfers, shell companies, LLCs, everything connected to Tom Richardson and Derek Reynolds going back 3 years. Marcus delivered in 10 days. The folder he handed me was 2 inches thick. Tom and Derek hadn't just stolen my property. They'd been running a small-scale real estate scheme, using falsified documents and strategic partnerships to flip properties for quick profits while avoiding taxes. My Riverside property had been their seed money. They'd used it as collateral for loans, then transferred it through 3 different LLCs to obscure the trail. Current value, $470,000, nearly $500,000 that was rightfully mine, sitting in an account under a shell company called RD Ventures LLC. But here's what made it devastating. Derek had indeed been planning to access Melissa's trust fund after marriage. He'd even filled out preliminary paperwork with the trust administrators, claiming he needed to review family assets before the wedding. He was going to drain her, too. My sister wasn't just complicit in my exile. She was the next victim. The irony was almost poetic. I made copies of everything. Then I made a plan. Melissa's wedding was set for the first Saturday in June at a vineyard estate in Sonoma. I knew this because she'd posted about it constantly. I knew there would be 200 guests. I knew the ceremony started at 4 p.m., followed by a reception under string lights in the garden. I also knew, thanks to some creative social media investigation, that Derek's parents were flying in from Connecticut, along with his 3 siblings and their families. Traditional, wealthy, conservative. The kind of people who valued reputation above almost everything. The kind of people who wouldn't take kindly to learning their son was a thief. 3 days before the wedding, I sent my first package. It went to Derek's father, Robert Reynolds, at his hotel in San Francisco. Inside was a leather portfolio containing complete financial documentation of the RD Ventures LLC property records, showing the transfer of my Riverside property email correspondence between Tom and Derek, a notarized letter from my attorney explaining the theft bank records, showing Derek's plans to access Melissa's trust fund post-marriage. I included a simple cover letter. Mr. Reynolds, I thought you should know what kind of man your son is before he marries into our family. The wedding is in 3 days. Perhaps you'd like to discuss this with him first. Maya Chen. The second package went to my mother, identical contents. The third went to Melissa herself, delivered to the bridal suite at the vineyard the morning of the wedding. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. My phone started ringing at 9 a.m. on the wedding day. Mom, blocked. Melissa, blocked. An unknown number that was probably Derek, blocked. My lawyer texted to say Tom's attorney had called in a panic, asking about settlement negotiations. Too late for negotiations. I got dressed around noon, not in anything fancy, jeans, a simple black top, sunglasses. I drove to Sonoma and parked at a cafe across from the Vineyard Estate. I ordered an iced coffee and settled in to wait. At 2 p.m., the first cracks appeared. Derek's family arrived in a caravan of rental cars. I watched through the vineyard's open gates as Robert Reynolds, tall, silver-haired, radiating fury, cornered Derek near the entrance. Even from a distance, I could see Derek's face go pale. His hands moved frantically, explanatory, defensive. Robert wasn't listening. By 2:30, Derek's mother had joined them, then his siblings. A family meeting right there on the lawn where the ceremony was supposed to happen in 90 minutes. At 3:15, Melissa emerged from the main house in her wedding dress. Even from across the street, I could see it was stunning. Layers of ivory silk, delicate beading. She looked like a princess. She looked like she was about to shatter. Mom was with her, and they were arguing. Melissa kept gesturing at the house, at the guests beginning to arrive, at Derek. Mom was shaking her head, trying to pull her back inside, but Melissa broke away and stormed across the lawn to where Derek was still cornered by his family. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Body language told the whole story. Melissa's confusion turning to horror as Derek tried to explain. Robert's disgust, Derek's desperation. The slow, terrible realization dawning on my sister's face that her perfect day was built on a foundation of lies. At 3:45, 15 minutes before the ceremony, Derek's father walked to the parking lot and drove away. His family followed. One by one, the rental cars disappeared down the hill. At 4 cars, the exact moment the ceremony was supposed to start, Melissa collapsed onto a bench near the arbor where she was supposed to say her vows. Even from a distance, I could see her shoulders shaking. Mom sat beside her, holding her, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than cold satisfaction. But only a flicker. The guests milled around in confusion. Some began to leave. Others clustered in groups, whispering. I watched Derek try to approach Melissa twice, and both times my mother physically blocked him. The second time, Mom said something that made him step back like he'd been struck. By 5 p.m., the vineyard was emptying out. The string lights that were supposed to illuminate a magical evening hung dark and useless. The caterers began packing up untouched food. Someone was crying near the entrance. One of Melissa's bridesmaids, maybe. I finished my coffee and drove home. The aftermath took weeks to fully unfold, and I watched it all from a careful distance. Derek and Melissa didn't get married. In fact, within 3 days, Melissa had contacted my lawyer about pressing charges against both Derek and Tom. Apparently, once she'd read through all the documentation, she'd discovered Derek had already started moving small amounts from her personal accounts, test runs for the bigger heist he'd planned post-marriage. Tom tried to negotiate a settlement, but I refused everything except full restitution of the property value plus interest and legal fees. When he couldn't pay, the case went to criminal court. Both he and Derek were charged with fraud and theft. The legal process was still grinding forward, but my attorney was confident we'd win. Derek's family cut him off completely. I heard through the grapevine that his father had been so humiliated by the scandal that he'd removed Derek from his will and demanded he change his last name. The real estate scheme collapsed once investigators started looking closely, and several of their other deals turned out to be equally fraudulent. But the hardest part, the part that kept me up some nights, was Melissa. For 2 months, we didn't speak. I saw Mom occasionally, tense lunches where we talked around the crater in the middle of our family. Mom was hurt that I'd destroyed the wedding, but even she couldn't argue with the facts. I'd saved Melissa from a marriage that would have bankrupted her. Still, the silence from my sister echoed. Then, on a Tuesday evening in late August, my doorbell rang. Melissa stood on my doorstep, no makeup, hair in a messy ponytail, wearing sweatpants and a Stanford hoodie from college. She looked young and tired and lost. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. We sat in my living room for 10 minutes without saying anything. I made tea. She held the mug but didn't drink. Finally, she spoke. I read everything, all of it, every email, every document, every page of the investigation report. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Maya, I'm so sorry." I didn't say anything. I was so wrapped up in my perfect life, my perfect wedding, my perfect relationship. I didn't even think about what you were going through. When Mom suggested not inviting you, I agreed. Because it was easier. Because I wanted everything to be beautiful and happy, and you reminded me that life isn't always beautiful and happy. I was a convenient scapegoat, I said quietly. You were my sister, and I threw you away like you were nothing. Tears started sliding down her face. And you saved me anyway. You could have let me marry him. You could have let him take everything from me, like he took everything from you. But you didn't. I thought about it, I admitted. For about 30 seconds, I thought about letting you go through with it. But you're still my sister, even when you didn't want to be mine. Melissa set down her tea and covered her face with her hands. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, I agreed. You don't. Not yet. She looked up at me, mascara smudged and vulnerable. But maybe eventually, I continued. If you're willing to actually be my sister, not just when it's convenient, not just when my life fits into your aesthetic, but actually, genuinely be my sister. I want that, she said. I want to be the sister I should have been all along. I want to know you again, the real you, not the version I created in my head to justify excluding you. It wasn't a Hollywood moment. We didn't hug and cry and have everything magically fixed. Rebuilding trust doesn't work that way. But we talked for 3 hours that night, and then she came back the next week, and then the week after that. Slowly, carefully, we started becoming sisters again. Mom came around too, eventually. She'd been horrified by what Derek had done, and guilty about her role in my exclusion. I should have fought for you, she told me one afternoon over coffee. I should have told Melissa she was wrong. I failed you as a mother. It was hard to hear, but we needed to say these things. We needed to acknowledge the hurt before we could heal it. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, I got my property back. The courts ruled in my favor, and Tom was forced to liquidate assets to pay me the full value plus 3 years of lost rental income and appreciation. It was enough to put a down payment on a new condo and restart my life properly. Derek took a plea deal and got 18 months in a minimum security facility, plus 5 years probation. Tom got probation and a massive fine. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard. I just felt tired. Melissa started therapy. She said she needed to understand how she'd become someone who'd treat her own sister like an inconvenience. The work was hard, she told me, but necessary. 1 year after the canceled wedding, Melissa and I took a trip together, just the two of us, to Mendocino for a long weekend. We hiked the coastal trails, ate too much seafood, and talked about everything. Her broken engagement, my divorce, our childhood, our dreams, our regrets. On the last evening, sitting on a bluff watching the sunset, Melissa said, "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." "You're my sister," I said simply. That doesn't stop just because things get hard. I know that now. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I'm sorry I had to learn it this way. We sat there as the sun sank into the Pacific, and I realized something. The revenge I'd wanted wasn't about destroying Melissa's wedding. It was about refusing to be erased. It was about standing up and saying, I matter. My pain matters. You can't just write me out of the family story because I'm inconvenient. The canceled wedding was just a byproduct of that truth. Would I do it the same way if I could go back? I don't know. Maybe I would have tried to talk to Melissa first, tried to warn her privately about Derek, but maybe she wouldn't have listened. Maybe she needed to see the whole structure collapse to understand what it was built on. What I do know is this. I'm not invisible anymore. Not to my family, not to myself. I reclaimed my inheritance, my dignity, and eventually my relationship with my sister. It wasn't the revenge story I'd imagined when I first found those emails, all dramatic confrontation and triumphant vindication. It was quieter than that, harder than that, more real than that. And in the end, it was enough. My name is Maya Chen. I'm 34 years old. I'm rebuilding my career in marketing. I have a sister who calls me every Sunday now. I have a mother who's learning to see me clearly instead of as a problem to be managed. And I have a story about the time I wasn't invited to a wedding because I'd make things awkward, and how I made sure that wedding would never happen. All, not out of cruelty, out of truth. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to let people rewrite you out of existence. Sometimes it's standing in the middle of the wreckage and saying, I'm still here, I'm still your family, and you're going to have to deal with that. The funny thing is, a year later, Melissa thanked me for it. Not for ruining her wedding, for saving her life. And maybe that's the real ending to this story. Revenge and rescue sometimes look exactly the same. It all depends on where you're standing when the dust settles.